Yo, what is going on at YouTube? Hope you guys are doing fantastic. The final patch of the year has just dropped, CA8, waiting for the actual next big patch in January. But we've got a little bit of a lull in changes until then, and I figured I'd put together a finally finished tier list going over each and every role, gods that I think are the best in each role, gods that I think are the worst in every role, and mostly for a ranked style. For competitive, it's going to be completely different, but I'll give you guys a rundown. Some OP gods, some low tier gods, builds to be running with them. And I got some really nice new visuals courtesy of OctoJinx VT, Twitter, Twitch chat. If you guys are in Twitch chat, you'll see them there. Thank you, man. These are awesome. Starting with solo lane, I got to point out Ra and Chalk. Currently, Ra and Chalk just dominate in the solo lane. They're both just very good in laning phase. They both scale unreal into the late game. The Ra build is the on-hit 2. You build a lot of attack speed, Berserkers, Pharaohs, Glad Shield, Phoenix Shield, and Talisman with Bluestone, and you just absolutely shred. I've done a couple videos on it. I think it's broken. The next one is Chalk. The cooldowns late game are just obnoxious, and he's a good laning phase character. Bluestones, Glad Shields, Phoenix Shields, stuff like that, and you'll be unkillable and you'll be doing a boatload of damage. For the great tier, Baron, Odin, and Sobek, I think they're all just really strong in the laning phase, and they're all just really useful when it gets to the later portions of the game. Baron has eaten a few nerfs, and I think maybe this is his last patch in S tier. Odin's also gotten a few little counterplay options with now anti-shield in the game, so maybe his last patch up in S tier. Sobek, I think, is clearly still going to be an S tier character. I think he's still great even after his nerfs. Rounding out the A tier, Alma, Bellona, Fenrir, Mordred, they just have glaring weaknesses that I think that make him a little bit weaker. I think Alma's probably got the best chance of moving up. I think Fenrir, Mordred, and Bellona are kind of hard stuck in A. In B tier, I think Aphrodite's just got a better role elsewhere. Hades, he's just fine. Mostly a better competitive pick. I think Hercules is really bad currently. I actually think he's probably one of the worst characters in the game. Nemesis, I think, is fine in solo. I think she's also got better roles elsewhere. And then Thor, I think, is just not a good solo laner at all. For low elo, it's just really easy to play Baron, Sobek, and Chalk, and to have value, I would look to play them. And for bans, same characters, Baron, Chalk, and Sobek. They're just really strong, and they really show no weaknesses at most points in the game. I think Ra does have a few weaknesses, but if you learn to play Ra, I think he's the best solo laner, and it's not close. Going over to jungle now, we just have one god and overpowered, and it is Loki. Very strong, even after his nerf. He farms better than most other solo laners. He team fights better than most other solo laners. And then he's just super safe. There's no downsides to Loki. And the buff to Jotuns I actually think helps him a lot. Jotuns, Hydras, and Oathsworn Sword are your core items. You can go Serrated. Just make sure you get a little pen online. Loki is very strong. And then Boombas. In the great tier, Pele and Thor, I think they both were just great additions to the game. I think Thor's got too much CC and damage currently. I think he just does way too much. He also farms very well. And then Pele, it is impossible to get away from her. She builds hybrid very well. While like Thor and Loki just build full damage, Boombas, Hydras, Oathsworn Sword, stuff like that. I think Pele builds full damage and she does really well with that. Or she can go a little bit more hybrid if she's playing into a difficult comp to dive. Talisman is something she could really easily fit into a build. Pharaohs is another thing that the active is very useful. She's got a lot of valuable pickups. Void if you're feeling like you need a little bit more physical defense. Binding if you want a little extra flat pen. There's a lot of good options for Pele, and I think the build diversity allows her to be in S tier. Poseidon, even after his nerfs, I think he's just a really quick jungler for farming. I think Doom Orb is still a decently underrated item, mostly in jungle. And then I think he just scales into a very strong character late game, and it's very hard to shut him down. Fenrir, always going to be super valuable, being able to just pick somebody up on the enemy team if they don't have beads and just one-shot them. Athena does a whole boatload of damage, and I actually think her best role currently is in the jungle. You'll see her played in competitive, and it's just... she does so much. The B tier, Chalk, Mordred, Nem, Odin, and Thanatos. I was thinking about moving Thanatos up. I think he's still a little bit weaker than the A tiers, but I do think there is something to be said about he's being maybe a bit underrated by me, but I still do think he's a B tier. And then Susano, this character has been gutted, killed, stomped on, elbow dropped, and he's not doing any CC. His damage is low. He's safe. That's his upside. If you're a lower elo player, Fenrir, Loki, and Pele are all really good and really easy. And for bans, Loki, Pele, and Thor, all of them are just very strong, and just getting them out of the enemy's hands I think is always a good idea. For mid lane, Yes, Zeus just got nerfed. He is still busted, guys. So much damage, a ton of survivability, surprisingly. And it's because he's got so much damage and survivability in his kit with like the movement speed, you can build into a defensive item. You can build into Jades, you can build into Purification, and you're still going to be very, very tanky and deal a boatload of damage. So Zeus is still going to be in the OP tier. He's not difficult, and he does just way too much. For the great tier, Baron, the Morrigan, and Aphrodite. And I think the most surprising one is probably the Morrigan. I think she is so busted with the ability to use 2 different relics. It makes her just so safe. You could use your relic to go in and then use the second relic that you get when transforming to get out. Her base damage is insane. Her invisibility is impossible to track, and she just does so much damage. She farms better than most characters too. There's so many positives to this character. I have to put her in S tier. Even if she is a little buggy, she's just so broken. And Baron, again, I think this character is just way too strong still. You just build full cooldown and your build will just be broken. Do I think he builds into a little bit of tankiness in mid? Yeah, you shouldn't build full damage Baron mid, but if you're playing against 3-4 physicals, just build a breastplate. If you're playing against a couple magicals, build a talisman. It's very effective to just live on Baron because of how strong and how high his base damage is. And then lastly, Aphrodite. An Aphrodite mid linked to a jungler is impossible to play against. Aphrodite clears well. She's very strong early game in 2v2s, and then she's also one of the best late game scaling characters in the game. I don't even think you need Asclepius really. You just need a good amount of cooldown on Aphrodite. Something like book into Chronos Pendant, book into Gem of Focus. Something like that is very, very strong. And even Cosmic Horror after the nerf is good. And Aphrodite's kind of the same thing as Baron is. Her biggest value comes from living in a lot of team fights. So just build a defense item or 2 on her and you'll be great. For the A tier, Anubis, I was arguing to keep an S tier even after the nerfs, but I think the nerf was just enough for him to not be S tier anymore. The CC duration and then the ultimate damage, I think knocks him down just a little bit, but I still do think he's very good. Cuckoo, one of the most underrated mid laners in the game, in my opinion. Very safe for farming, very strong team fight actually in zoning with his 3. And I think people underestimate how hard it is to kill this god and how easy he can actually turn onto you with the dash that he had added into his kit. I think he's great. Medusa, a lot of damage. I think she still has her obvious weaknesses of she's pretty easy to dive as a jungler, but she kind of has really easy fight back now too, where it's a risky dive. She can burst you. I still do think that she is A tier. She's good. Nuwa, Poseidon round out the A tier. Nuwa, a ton of value. Not very good early game, but if you get to late game, she's broken. And Poseidon, he just farms really well. Yes, his cooldown nerfs hurt him a little bit, but not enough to move him out of the A tier. B tier, Neith and Ra. I think their damage is just a little too low in this damaging role for them to be that effective. C tier, Hades, Hecate, and Sol. I think Hecate is probably the worst traditional mid lane. Her damage feels low and her utility now is even lower. I think she's an awesome and she's a cool character, but I just never really see a reason to pick her. And then Hades mostly plays like a Soul laner. Soul mage build is not good, so you're mostly playing her in ADC, but I figured I'd just honorary put them into C tier. And for low elo, Baron, Cuckoo, and Anubis, I think are all very easy and very strong. Afro, Baron, and Zeus, I think are just good throwaway bans. Zeus, because he's just so OP, and then Afro and Baron just have a lot of value, even if the enemy mid laner is not that good. Next up, support. We have 2 OP characters in support, Baron and Sobek. I will not hear the end of Baron being one of the best characters in the game until they do massive, massive nerfs to this character. Still too much CC, too much base damage, too much utility, and building it in support means you can't really kill him either, and he's still being just as effective as he is in any other role. Sobek, yes, the nerf to his pluck makes him feel a little bit worse, but he's still just so effective in laning phase and so effective at stacking Prophetic, which I think should be built in nearly every support game. It's way too much survivability and it's way too easy to stack. Build Prophetic on both Baron, Sobek, Afro, Bacchus. I mean, even Kepri Emojis, the Ymirs, I think it's worth it to build because the upside is so insane. Sobek does a ton of damage. He's very strong in laning phase, which is surprising. And then he's also one of the most threatening gods in the game. Aphrodite's still in the S tier, just not OP as a support anymore. I think if she still had scaling per level on her 3, I would keep her in OP tier. Since they removed that and they made it scaling, it makes it so you have to itemize a little bit into intelligence if you want to heal as much as you would have in Smite 1. But I still think she's very good. I think you just have to build a damage item, which makes you just a little bit more squishy, a little easier to deal with. Build Asclepius. You can build Chronos Pendant on this character in support. She's very, very strong. Still worth the pick. For A tier, Bacchus, Khepri, Emoja, and Ymir. Very easy characters that are just very good at what they want to do. Bacchus is probably the easiest one in this tier to play. That's why he's in low elo in the low elo tier with Sobek and Ymir. Ymir's still pretty easy because of how strong his laning phase is. It's just easier to punish him because he doesn't have the jump like Bacchus does over a wall. He can kind of launch himself a little bit with his wall, but not jump over a wall. And then Khepri, Emoja, if you're a comfortable backline support and you know when to walk forward, when to back up, these two are very, very broken. With Emoja, spam your 2. Khepri, make sure you're 2ing your teammates and ulting anybody that's low, and then just CCing to set up. In the B tier, Ares, Athena, and Hercules. I was actually considering putting all these characters into C tier, but it was weird to have them all in B tier. I don't think any of them are really that good, and I don't think there's any really real reason to pick them. The only reason they're not in C tier is that Fenrir is just so bad in support now. I don't ever really think you should pick him. And your bans, Baron, Sobek, and Aphrodite. It's just the 3 OP ones in support. They're not hard to play. They're all just very valuable if you just log into the game. Lastly, for ADC, Jingwei in the OP tier. It's not changing. Her 1 is so broken for farming under tower. She's very safe. She scales into the best late game hunter. She can still build crit. And then Dev's Gloves is still very, very broken. Build Devs on Jingwei. But for gods like CERN, in the S tier, no longer is he building devs. I actually think the best build is the Sunbeam Bow build on Cernanos. It makes him an insane threat when he dashes onto you. And if you ever try to dive him, his damage is insane. You'll still build Lifesteal eventually, or at least Death's Embrace, but just make sure you have Xe, Kins, Braggies, and then you have Sunbeam Bow. Izanami, another devs character, very strong laning phase, very good into the late game now after the changes to her ultimate enter 1. I'm a big fan of Izanami. Very few downsides to her. Just a little bit easier to dive than most other ADCs, but I still think she's great. Medusa, I think she's much better in duo lane than she is in mid. I think her 1v1 potential now against most characters is incredibly scary. If she can even take away her jungler's speed buff, or if she invades your speed buff, she's the hardest character in the game to 1v1, and her damage is through the roof. All you have to do is just make sure you get some strength, some intelligence, Braggies, bracers, stuff like that, and Medusa just one-shots. For A tier, Honor, Danzaburo, Zeus. I'm not a massive fan of Zeus. I just have to respectfully put him here because of how good Tegvir looks on this character in competitive. You build a tankier Zeus, he goes like shifters and axe, and it looks very good. I think full damage crit Zeus is terrible and should not be in the A tier, but for the specific tankier style ADC Zeus, I think it is an A tier pick. Danzaburo and Honor are in A tier also. I just think they're fine. Realistically, if you're not playing the top 4, you probably shouldn't be playing ADC anyway. I think there's a big discrepancy in this role from the top 4 or top 5 to the next lowest ones. And it's specific with the ADC even more than other roles. Neath, Soul, B tier, not very good. And then Nuwa, C tier, horrible in duo lane. For low elo, Sunbeam Bow Cernanos is broken. Izanami is OP for clearing wave. Soul is just an easy to play character with a little bit of safety, so she's fine. But even then, Medusa is a pretty easy low elo character. And then for bans, Jingwei, so you can actually kill the enemy ADC if you're playing something that has aggression. CERN, really good and really hard to 1v1, so he's a good throwaway ban. And then Izanami, just because it's impossible to outclear her, so it's a good throwaway ban. But yeah, that is the tier list. Let me know if you guys like this type of tier list better, where I go over each role individually and I don't include every single god, instead of just going over it in a giant tier list talking about them. I think this one makes a little bit more sense, and I can talk about every individual role as a whole, and I kind of like it more, but I want to know what you guys think. But I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you support us today. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.